It's cinnamon roll time, and since spring has kind of sprung, I'll stuff these bad boys with blueberry and lemon, because that's just how I roll. Get it? Oh boy. To the kitchen. Alright, hey, so when I think about baking something like cinnamon rolls, you think of a lot of ingredients, but it's really not that much as you can see here. I found this phenomenal recipe for the dough itself attached below. We'll start with the milk, get our butter into there, give it a quick stir. We just want to melt this, heat it up to about 110, so you can put your finger in it, and it's just about warm. Afterwards, we'll get our yeast. I completely forgot to record while pouring the yeast, so warning, this is just a reenactment. Once we move on from that mistake, we'll give a quick mix to our yeast into this warm liquid, and that will help it bloom faster. After about 5 minutes, you can see it looks a little bit like this, starts to look funky. That's exactly what we want, so we'll move on to our dry ingredients. We'll get our all-purpose flour, our sugar, our salt, give that a little bit of a mix. Here comes our yeast mixture along with our cracked egg, and then you want to just mix this around. If you're using a machine or an electric paddle, of course it's easy, but for a smaller batch like this, super easy to do by hand. We just want to mix it around. It's going to be super wet until it starts to look like a really shaggy wet dough ball. When it starts to look like this is when we can flour our work surface. Our dough should slide out of our bowl nice and easy onto this. It might be a little bit sticky, but just help it out onto the flour. And now it is time to start kneading it, but before we do so, get your hands covered in flour to make it much easier to work with. Toss them in the air if you're feeling frisky. And this is such a soft dough that it's so easy to work with. It really doesn't take that long to move it around. We just want to form it into a ball, so it literally just takes about 3 minutes. You just want to develop some gluten, get that into the shape that we're looking for. Just make sure you've washed your hands, because we don't want any poppy getting sloppy situations, if you know what I mean. Once we have our ball shape, super soft, still slightly sticky, this is when we want to get into the bowl to start resting. So a clean bowl, we'll hit it with some butter spray or some oil. I went crazy with this. You don't need that much. It is going to puff up, so you want to make sure you hit the sides and the bottom well, but don't need as much as I put. Once we get it nestled into there, we're going to let it rest for at least 45 minutes to an hour. This is really going to help us develop really soft, fluffy cinnamon rolls in the end. After it's had a chance to rest, look at how much this is puffed up. Again, this is what's going to help us get those really soft, fluffy cinnamon rolls, but we want to get some of this air out, so we'll start puffing it down with our fingers. Then once again, we will flour our work surface as well as our rolling pin. This would be pretty tough to do by hand, so I definitely suggest using a rolling pin and hitting it very nicely with some flour. Then this will slide out of our bowl super easily, and then again, it's time to knead it just a little bit. We're not trying to knead it like we did before, just very quickly, just to make sure that the outside isn't too wet and that this is in a nice round shape, easy to work with. Once you've achieved said round status, it's time to start rolling this out. So I start really slowly with this. Obviously, it's a little bit easier as you go along. When you get started, you just kind of want to take your time, and there's real no rhyme or reason. I'm just going to go each way, flip it, turn it 9 degrees, flip it again, make sure that there's plenty of flour on each side, and just keep rolling it out until it's thinner and thinner and thinner, until we have this kind of oval rectangular shape, if you will, because we want a nice flat surface to put our filling onto. Speaking of our filling, you can literally use whatever you'd like, but for spring, I think blueberries is appropriate, so I will start with 3 cups of frozen blueberries. I find frozen works better than fresh. And now I'll use 3 to 4 packets of sugar. Substitute depending on how much you like it. Use real sugar if that's your thing. A tiny sprinkle of salt just to bring out the flavor. And now it's time for the lemon, so I will take the lemon, zest it, get that in there, take the juice, throw that in there as well. Make sure to give everything a nice stir, and then we'll just start cooking this down. I like to do it over medium-high heat. Once we're a few minutes in, then I'll get some mint in there. It's just a really nice freshness. It just kind of helps lighten everything up and give it a bit of freshness. And then I'll just let this simmer. If you want to do this low and slow, you can go for as long as you want. I do it kind of high and rapidly just to really get that moisture out and let it cook down. That's why I do it uncovered, because we don't want moisture when we're putting this into our rolls. Let this cool thoroughly, and we have a nice blueberry compote, maybe a jam, because I don't think I'm ready for this jelly. While that is cooling down, we can get back to our dough, and here's where I'll get some butter in here. I really didn't use that much, just a few dabs just to get it all over. I spread it out, and then I started with a knife. So much easier to just get in there with your hands and just mix it all around. You just want to make sure it's covered everywhere, just so there's a layer between the dough and the dry ingredients that we're going to put on it. Speaking of which, here's our brown sugar. If I was doing regular cinnamon rolls, I'd do a ton more brown sugar than this, but I'm just doing enough of the brown sugar to not miss it, just to sprinkle it to get a little bit on every piece of it. Same thing with the cinnamon. Traditional rolls, I'd be using at least double or triple this, but because I want to highlight the blueberries and lemon, I'm using just enough brown sugar and cinnamon just to coat each piece of this surface. It's just a thin layer of the butter, the cinnamon, and the brown sugar. You could omit it if you just wanted to highlight some ingredients like I'm putting in here, but I think it all ties very nicely together. So I will start sprinkling on my cooled blueberry mixture, and you can see it's dried out very nicely. We don't want all that excess liquid coming out. This may not look like a lot, but it actually proves to be plenty, which you'll see shortly. You want to spread it all the way to the ends. Careful not to go over, because you'll make a huge mess. This is looking like a piece of art. And because I want a really prominent lemon flavor, I'll take 1 more lemon and I'll just zest it right over top of this, being careful not to get any of the white, just the yellow. It will add a really nice flavor, and it will just kind of melt into there. And now you just want to start rolling it up, right? Start super slowly. It's a little bit hard in the beginning to kind of find the edge and find the groove, get yourself going. But once you do, it becomes a lot easier. And just take your time with this. Make sure that you're rolling it smoothly so it's getting all evenly. Nothing's kind coming flying out. Once you have done so, we'll form into kind of this bread-looking loaf, making sure that it's even all the way across and the filling is spread out nice and evenly. It's time to discuss a very important step, cutting it. Some people suggest using a wire, but that kind of feels a little bit dexter to me, so I prefer to just go with a really sharp knife. I like to make the lines beforehand because I'm terrible at measuring evenly, so this kind of just gives me a glide line to work off of. A serrated knife may have been easier for this. You just want to make sure that you're making a nice, sharp, even cut, so you're not really messing with the shape too much. Obviously, you can see these aren't perfect rounds here, but I do have a chance to kind of reshape them once they get into the pan. So as long as you're using a sharp knife, whether it be serrated or not, anything that just cuts through very nicely and the filling doesn't make a mess and go everywhere. Once it's cut, we will grab our pan, grease it well with your preference of grease, and this is when we can start fitting them in the pan. Whether you go circular, square, rectangular, whatever you want, as long as there's room for them to puff up, you can see you have a chance to really reshape these once they get into the pan. You don't have to leave a ton of room between them, but you do want to leave a little bit, enough for them to puff up, and that's why you can be kind of adaptable with what shape of the pan that you're using. But I will cover these one more time. I happen to have a piece of tin foil, so that'll work. After at least a half hour to an hour of resting, look at the puffiness. These have pumped up so much it's enough to make Arnold giggle, and all this resting is why we're gonna have soft, fluffy, amazing cinnamon rolls. I'll go 375 for about 30 to 35 minutes. Gonna take a little bit longer to that filling to cook through. While we're waiting on those, let's get our cream cheese icing going. So here's about 6 ounces of cream cheese that I will flatten down a little bit. Then I'll add my butter. Melt your butter. Don't be a jabroni like me. So much easier to work with once it's melted, and it's for a better finished product. Once we've blended these two together, I'll get in my powdered sugar, my vanilla extract, give that a mix. Now it's starting to look like icing. Again, with the lemon theme, I'll get a few drops of lemon juice. Don't get seeds in there like me. A little bit of mint for that freshness, and there you go. This is some amazing icing. It's lemony, it's minty, it's cream cheesy. You could put this on a boot and you'd still be in for a good time, but we're not going to put it on a boot. We're going to put it on some cinnamon rolls, so as soon as these come out of the oven, you can see they brown super nicely. If they're browning too quickly, you can always cover them, but I like to get that nice brownness right on top to where you're seeing just a little bit of white in between them. To me, that's how I know they're done, and my kitchen smells absolutely amazing. This is when we'll slather on all the icing when they're still super hot. They're going to soak it up so nicely. They really do soak it up like a sponge. You want to hit every crevice. I like to put enough to where it looks like there's almost too much, and they just soak it up so nicely. They'll dry super quickly. They'll come out really nice. You can see the beautiful marbling and the softness in the pan. If you want to get fancy with the presentation, go ahead, but who we kidding? I'm a savage. And you can just see, I mean, even those little parts in the end, they're so soft. They rip apart like a piece of cake. The sides are soft and fluffy. The blueberry part is looking delicious. It's nice and soft there. Now I'm just going to get in here like a maniac and just put my thumbs in this and stretch it out. Those crispy edges are the best inside here with the blueberries everywhere, getting even deeper. You can see this is why I like with the blueberries, because there's just so many different layers. Blueberry, of lemon, of everything else in there. To me, the absolute best part of a cinnamon roll is the core. It soaked everything up. I mean, this thing is chock full of the blueberries and everything else that it's soaked up. My fingers are getting gross, probably getting gross to look at, but I won't leave so much as a crumb. Whether you're keeping it traditional or using whatever ingredients you'd like, if you want an amazing treat that makes your house smell ridiculous for the next 17 hours, much like Mando, this is the way.